I intend to put up with nothing that I can put down. Edgar Allan Poe. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Shymanski, and today I'm with Theresa Power. She's an Access librarian at the Center for Equitable Library Access to talk about the mass appeal effect. Do you stay away from the overrated books we popularize through mass buy-in? Or is that mob mentality what gets you to pick it up in the first place? You know, things like celebrity memoirs with all the hype, the top 5 fantasy series you must read, or friggin' Twilight. All these books, are they popular because they're good, or do they sell well because they're popular? Right? And we asked this question to our book club and got lots of different responses. Because when we talk about overrated books, that intrinsically has to do with the relation between the popularity and the quality of a book. So there's this weird phenomenon where the more popular a book gets, the more criticism it gets, regardless of its quality. Like there's always going to be a counterculture movement towards anything that gets popular. Theresa, I've been bloviating for the past minute. I want to get your perspective on this before we hear from everybody from the book club.
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question. Do you shy away or stay away from books that are incredibly popular? And I have to say that I actually kind of do. And I was reflecting on this, and I don't know that I have like a great answer as to why, but I would say that just because I don't necessarily pick up a book when it's super popular at the beginning doesn't mean that I don't come to it a few years later and pick it up then after all of the hubbub about it is done. And maybe part of me just doesn't quite want to get like caught up into those kinds of fervors. And maybe also part of the popularity of books right now comes from places like Book Talk or TikTok, which I'm not really connected to. So I'm a bit disconnected in that way as well.
I totally understand why people would want to read books that many other people have read, because then you're in on the conversation and then there's more content you can fully enjoy, right? Because a lot of content out there, you need to have read the book to feel fully involved in the conversation, in the content. So I totally understand that. The thing is, like, think of a book like 50 Shades of Grey. Super popular, and it gets tons of hate. But why did it get popular in the first place? It wouldn't have gotten popular if it was terrible. I mean, there are occasionally situations where people like hate read and it becomes kind of a phenomenon, but that's very, very rare. I don't think that's what happened with 50 Shades of Grey. I think people genuinely loved it for what it was and then got incredibly popular. The question is, like, was the book ever good? My argument is that clearly it was doing something for a lot of people. And so, like, yes, it was good in a way. Like, what do you think of that situation?
So Twilight, 50 Shades of Grey, I tried to read, and I distinctly remember trying to read it. Distinctly remember the occasion in my kitchen reading it out loud to my partner. Jeez. Because there's this book was like super popular and like 50 Shades of Grey, and this is what it's all about, and a rare moment I think for me where I wanted to kind of tap in and see what that popularity was about. I think at that time, especially because like a movie was going to be coming out based on it too. And I don't want to make judgment about good or bad. If you read it and you love it, I'm more happy that you're reading than anything. But I personally found it to be unreadable, like just absolutely unreadable. But I think that book really hit the nerve of a certain population of people, and maybe people who didn't necessarily like read a lot. And I think it really captivated that audience, and they became a really big and growing audience. And I think in part, if you call it erotic literature or romance, since then, I think I would say is probably responsible for where the romance genre is today and how
Really?
super
Wow.
popular it is today. Yeah. And I think a lot of people probably wouldn't have been as vocal about reading romance. It's always been kind of a maligned genre,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And now we have tons of people who are reading romance and like genres of romance as well. So I think for better or worse, there was definitely a segment of the population that, you know, 50 Shades of Grey did it for them. And kudos to them.
Wow. For
Yeah.
a book that gets so much hate, the way you talk about it, it
Yeah.
sounds like it was a massive touchstone in the history of publishing
I
to like kickstart
I
this
think
like modern
so.
love and appreciation of
I
romance
think
and
so.
erotica.
Yeah, I think that people really came out of the woodwork and were like, yeah, romance, I'm here for it, you know? And that population that really loved it. I don't know if we want to get to the psychology of like why they loved it, but they loved it. And I don't think we've really like gone back since with that genre. Yeah.
To tie it back to the topic of our conversation here, which is overrated books, and
Mm,
was 50 Shades of Grey ever critically acclaimed? Absolutely not. But that didn't
mm-hmm,
stop it from being this big cultural touchstone in
mm-hmm,
publishing, right? I want
mm-hmm.
to get to some of the answers that our members of the book club submitted about, their opinions on overrated books and if, or very popular books, and if they want to read them. Let's start out strong with this one from Huli McLaughlin. She says, I avoid anything popular because I'm a snob. Popularity equals dumb, in my opinion, and I avoid anything promoted by celebrities because I think they are basically too stupid to give recommendations. And if they're doing it because somebody paid them to do it, then the product must be, by definition, not worth very much. Okay, that's quite a hot take. I want to start with the very last part of that email, having to do with if it's popular, if it's being promoted by a celebrity, then that means by definition must be bad. I don't think I necessarily agree with that. And to say that everything that's popular is dumb is also a bit of a hot take, but I also don't think it's not entirely wrong. I think you kind of have to dumb things down to become very, very popular. That's why you don't see like the most like intellectually stimulating, literary fiction on the New York Times bestsellers list. What sells is what appeals. And the truth is that most people don't have a university level reading comprehension.
I think that the person points to an interesting thing, which is, how books are marketed. And I think that there's definitely value in thinking about maybe the origins or the impetus for a book itself and how it is marketed to an audience for sure. And maybe there's room there to feel skeptical about why certain books are made and pushed out to people and
Hmm.
why certain books get, uber marketing around them and maybe why some books don't. But, it's a tricky question, I think, to answer or to comment on because, I almost think about it as, what is the role of books themselves? I don't know to think too philosophically about it, but maybe books are here not just to inform us about things that we didn't know or open our minds, but also to entertain us. And so just as much as there's a place for a literary nonfiction book, there's also a role for you know books like 50 Shades of Grey as well to read.
I think everybody likes a good dumb action or comedy movie once in a while. It's no different with
Absolutely.
books, right? It's
Absolutely.
clear it's like elitism, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
no, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you. Yeah,
Oh,
I
I'm glad
absolutely.
you agree with me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. With the, I think the movie metaphor is a really good one. I don't know why we are so critical of books, but maybe less critical of the movies that we watch because, gosh, I love the next Marvel movie just as much as the next person. Really, I love the action. Does it really make you like think big thoughts? I don't know, like not necessarily. But then I will also sit down and I will watch maybe a more critically acclaimed movie as well that really gets me thinking things too. And there's a place for all of these things to exist at the same time. And I think the benefit is that we have the choice, right?
So when Huli McLaughlin says that if celebrities are endorsing a book, then
Mm,
they're doing it because somebody paid them to do it. Then the product, by definition, must not be worth much. I don't agree with that on the surface, but I do agree that when a celebrity endorses a book, it does feel icky. It's just hard to believe, right?
hmm
Like if Tom Hanks likes a book, I'm like, who gives a crap? Like, who is this guy? Like,
hmm
I'd rather get a more democratic idea of whether a book is good or not, right? Or, like a close friend that I understand their taste, right? It's just like a recommendation from a celebrity feels icky to me. But I do want to move on to the next one from Sadine Lowe, who has a more optimistic look at it. She says, if the genre interests me, I may read it. For example, Twilight, 50 Shades of Grey, there it is again, etc. I think most books are popular because they are good. The author has a fan base that gets their friend reading the book, and then there's a domino effect. For example, I made my friends read Colin Hoover because a friend made me read Colin Hoover. But not all things that glitter are gold. Either way, I will listen to the book if I'm already a fan of the narrator. Sadine, this reminds me of when a friend of mine told me, "Oh, Jacob, listen or watch this anime. It's really sick." I'm like, okay, I'll go watch it. And then I watched it. I watched it for a season. I go back to him. He's like, yeah, like, let's talk about it. Like, I watched it. What did you think of it? He's like, oh, I just wanted to know what your thoughts were. I only watched the first episode. So all he wanted to do was somebody to talk to you about it. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Sometimes you just want to be part of the conversation, right? So I don't know. I honestly don't know where to stand on this, but Sadine is saying here that a book is popular because it's good. It has to be good on some level to become popular. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think there has to be some thread of interest that connects people. And I just
Thread of
thinking back,
interest is not
yeah.
good, though.
How are you defining good though? How are we defining good? Like what does
Okay,
that
that's
mean?
a good question.
I feel like that's such a subjective thing and it's really hard to say like what I consider a good book or what that even means versus the next person.
Well, thread of interest is a really good way to put it. What's
hmm
bringing people to this book? There has to be a pull towards this book, like a cultural reason why lots of people want to come to
hmm
it. And just saying that a book is quality is good isn't always going to sell it. Often books become memes, or they become so critically acclaimed that the book becomes like bigger than itself. Like it becomes like a cultural touchstone, that type of thing. This happens with a lot of nonfiction, in my opinion. Like
hmm
I remember the book The Art of Not Giving an F, which
hmm
got really popular just because it had a funny title, and it wasn't good, but it got
No.
popular because it looked good on bookshelves, right? And people took pictures of it on Instagram. Like, oh, look at this book
hmm
title! What a funny shelf at the bookstore.
And I think we can't underestimate how popular like self-help books
So
are.
popular, so
So
popular.
hugely popular. I think we even talked about it on this podcast before. It's just like how super popular self-help books are, and um, yeah, I think, we can talk a lot about celebrity memoirs specifically because it was brought up in this quote too, especially because I feel that we've really been inundated
So
with
many.
celebrity memoirs. Like the past, I don't know, maybe like 3, 5 years or so, there are so many celebrity memoirs. And we read and reviewed one even ourselves on.
Yeah, the Woman in Me by Britney Spears, which was very anticipated, not because Britney Spears is known for being a great author, but because you people wanted to know like what the deal was, what the story was with her in, from the mid 2000s to up till now with the whole conservatorship situation.
Yeah, no, I think the comment about, celebrity memoirs is a really interesting one because we have been so inundated with them over the past number of years. I think, more and more we hear about, this person and that person is now coming out with a memoir. And I read a really interesting blog post actually, and it's from early February of this year from uh, a blogger, avidbards.com, and I would suggest going to check it out. And they have a really interesting piece about the change in celebrity memoirs, actually, where,
Hmm.
the celebrity memoir originally came from a person who has had like a career, like a career that they could really like reflect on, and a life that they could really reflect on, being that celebrity. And the perspective was very intimate. It was very, it's first person perspective. And it really allowed the celebrity to kind of reflect on their career, right? But um, this person talks about how the memoir has really changed from that to being almost voyeuristic, actually,
Hmm.
and um, actually goes out, as far as to say as it's become kind of like gossip culture,
Yeah.
and that in part also
Yes.
speaks to the way that they're marketed, which is like tell alls, right? And the focus now is more to prioritize the story of now, and I think that that's something that we even brought up when we were talking about the Britney Spears memoir. Is like, is she going to look down the road, 30 years from now, is she going to look back and be like, this memoir, like, should I have written it? So it's more about the story of now rather than the story of like, a lifetime in that particular career. And the person also talks about how some of these celebrities are talking about very like vulnerable times in their career. The whole idea of celebrity, in fact. Um, but the way that their books are marketed, and the way that and the fact that they even have these books almost capitalizes on the negative things that they're talking about. So it's kind of like a catch 22. So I think that there's a lot of there to be maybe critical about with celebrity memoirs.
That's so interesting. So it used to be, if I'm understanding correctly, that memoirs were more of a utilitarian thing for, career-oriented people, that when they were at the top of their business and they had a long 30, 40-year career, they would release a memoir. Like this reminds me of, Bob Iger's book, the president of Disney. But like that is something I'd love to hear about it, and especially if you were somebody who was in show business, entertainment, or just the CEO in general. Like it's very useful. Barack Obama's book, right? That is something that's very useful to a lot of people. And then
Mm-hmm.
like Matthew McConaughey comes out with a memoir, which is definitely more in the voyeuristic category. Although that book did sell 6 million copies, so it's doing something right. I want to get to another response, and this one's from our regular contributor, Sarah Hillis.
It takes a lot for me to read a book that is hyped. And I usually need to wait a couple of years after the main hype to see if it's still hyped, because then I feel that the mass approval is more earned. I don't like really quick mass approval. Like, I mean, I don't do TikTok anyway, so I can't go on the TikTok what are they, like a book talk? Is that what they call it? Channels, and check those out, I admit. But yeah, like it took me years to decide to read a Harry Potter book, and that was because a couple of my fellow adult friends said you should read the Harry Potter books, and I was like, why are they telling me this? They're not kids. And then I read them, and I thought, how cool is that? But
Of course you did.
but yeah, I'm not a fan when someone says this book is so hyped, everybody's reading it, or when I look at the bestsellers on Audible or something, I immediately go, I'm not going to read that, not going to read that, not going to read that, for the most part, right? Like that Atomic Habits book by James Clear has been on that list for several more than 2 years or something, and it's like, why? Like, maybe it is a good book, I don't know, but it just seems over hyped and maybe artificially amplified. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure when I get suspicious, but there's times when I get suspicious that things have been artificially kind of manipulated.
Yeah.
Bestseller lists and stuff, and I could be really wrong about that, but I do think there are ways in which distributors and publishers can kind of make it look more best-selly than maybe it actually is. And I don't mean to be mean, but I think that's true. So yeah, I'm a bit of a suspicious person as to marketing anyway. So it's hard for me to it's hard for you to get me to read a hyped book. You have to explain why you liked it.
Agreed.
And it probably has to be about 2 years after it was actually first hyped. That's kind of how I roll.
Theresa, you seem to have a reaction. Oh, sorry. I'll wait till it stops.
She's speaking my language.
Yeah, right. So you seem to have a reaction when she was talking about how publishers can manipulate sales numbers. Is that what you were reacting to?
I think I was reacting to the criticism, or thinking critically about those bestseller lists, because so often they're based on pre-sales of a particular book. So I think that there's a lot to unpack there about why bestseller lists, how bestseller lists are devised, I suppose, and the kinds of books that tend to end up there all the time. And, there are particular authors that guaranteed will be on like the New York Times bestseller list. Like James Patterson will always be on the bestseller list, always. And there's a lot that he does and his marketing conglomerate does around like marketing those books and getting those books out. And also there's just a sheer number of them. You can't avoid them.
I mean, to be fair, though, Stephen Patterson has like quite the brand name recognition, and that's probably for a reason. Like, people do genuinely like his books. Are you saying that it's like both of the fact that he's popular, but also maybe there's a bit of shenanigans going on in the background with publishers, boosting numbers? Maybe it's a bit of both.
I mean, I can't really speak to whether the numbers are being fudged by any means, but I think that there's a lot probably going on in the background that's not very transparent to people around how those bestseller lists are put together. And like whatever conclusion you want to draw on, maybe think why James Patterson is always on there, or there's certain romance authors that are always on there as well.
And then there's also this like self-fulfilling prophecy type situation going on, where if a book makes it to the New York Times top 10 bestsellers list, there's a better chance of selling even more. Mm-hmm. Right? And so those authors become, entrenched in that system of the New York Times top 10 bestsellers list, because it's a very influential list.
It is. And it's, often something that authors themselves will talk about. My book landed number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. I know Louise Penny does that a lot, and she does that quite a bit with reviews as well. Like I got a great review from Kirkus, for example, for my latest book. So yeah, I think that it's definitely used as a marketing tool by people.
Theresa, that's all the time we have for today's conversation. I do want to keep going on this. We will get back to this conversation because I think there's a lot to unpack there. Thank you so much for making time. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today's episode of AMI Audiobook Review. We air on AMI Audio at 1 p.m. Eastern on weekends, and it repeats every 6 hours. We're also available as a podcast wherever you listen to them, and that includes on YouTube. You can leave us feedback at audiobookraview@ami.ca. That's audiobookraview@ami.ca. We also have an Instagram page, AMI Audiobook Review _. AMI Audiobook Review _. And we don't just use it to plug our next episode. We post special content on there in short format for the reels. And we've been having tons of fun with that as well. I'm Jacob Shymanski. You were listening to AMI Audiobook Review. Thanks for listening.